due to efficiency, low cost, high speed, like ecological footprint, etc. So going there, creating this kind of very unique organic forms for each site, I think it's becoming weak unless you talk about the fabrication process and unless you talk about an interface, parametric virtual model that would allow you to customize very easily for the local conditions, right? And otherwise, said, it's beautiful. I do appreciate the fact of rethinking that infrastructure as an infrastructure that could also provide additional services. For example, the creation of spaces that they could be inhabited. You can even start thinking how this could create maybe a kind of economical model because tourists would go there, they could use that space. And, like thinking of an ecosystem that it's not only related with vegetation, but also with social interaction or even economical, let's say, generation, no? That could probably give back to the problem that I was commenting before.
Yo me estoy preguntando, me parece muy interesante adaptar la forma a la topografía para poder, pero me pregunto si el hecho de de usar un material degradable es porque te planteas el sistema como una forma de recuperar el lugar. Pues son zonas taladas, ha dicho, ¿no? O deforestadas. Okay.
Because the base material is cocoa fiber and alpha fiber, and when it decomposes, it just goes back to the soil. It's like a compost.
Okay. Great.
Why use concrete? It's such a non-ecological.
Concrete is just for the more permanent eroded areas, but for the rest, like a more gradual slope or the steeper slopes, that will be like the cocoa fiber material.
There are areas in mountains when you have all these waterfalls or torrents that you cannot avoid to make a fixed structure because water is going to be accumulating there. So maybe that's where where the concrete is.
The concrete will be mixed with cocoa fiber and abaca fiber. There's the new type of concrete, so it will be more sustainable.
Permanent, and others that will reintegrate. That's beautiful.
Can you farm in the grooves?
Yes, but it's not in the grooves. It's here on the ridges. Yeah, on the ridges here. Yeah, because here in the grooves, that's where the water will flow, and here underneath you have the compost, like a cocoa fiber.
Yeah, and it's a gradient. Yeah. So you change the farm from something.
Maria.
Thank you.
Okay, Thais, thank you so much. Let's start with Yasmin.
Yeah, but I will put something on the noise.
Switch it now.
I don't know how to.
Can you run the thing?
No, I don't want to run it now.
So you open it later. Okay. But I will run now.
No, but it's no. I can do this. don't want to run it now.
Okay, we start.
Okay. Hello. My name is Yasmin, and I'm an architect slash athlete. This thesis for me is more of a personal path. There was nothing really that inspired me more than being both those things, and how these two things have influenced my point of view about architecture. One of my biggest inspirations for my project has been Marina Abramovich, which is the grandmother of performance art. And she said something really interesting. We're actually living a million parallel realities every single minute. And I do believe that nowadays architecture does not consider that part the parallel reality we live in, and that there are things happening around us that we don't really put into consideration, like proximity, visual angle, how our personal space, how far we are from people. So another very big inspiration for me was Duchamp, and I really like this image because he was playing chess against himself, showing that in one situation we're everywhere, but we just got to know where we are positioned. This is not showing up, okay. Right, it's not showing up. Okay, like I can show it later, it's okay. Yeah, yes, yeah. Okay, and this is my parallel reality. This is how I look at parallel reality. And for me, I feel like as we walk through life, we have things like how we look at people, how we see people, and these things influence our perception of space. So I decided to tackle a public space, and that public space is a tennis center court. Given that I'm a tennis player, and it's been my most the place I spend most of my time, I have a lot of memories and a lot of things I would like to change in that space. And as we see, like all the spaces here are tennis stadiums from all over the world, and they all look the same, as if every single performer, every single spectator here would have the same experience. This is 1940, Luigi Moretti, back in the day, where we can see that obviously he looked at different things that what we're doing today. So what's happening that we're going backwards, not forwards, in my opinion, where he, in this model, considered the different visual angles and sculpt the stadium to be accordingly, so people have perfect visual angles at every part of the stadium. In order to start my thesis, I analyzed the different models he has created and created the logic he has created. And basically, this is one of his models, that how he created the logic of that model. And it's basically 35-degree angles, which is one of a good visual angles we can have in order to create his topography. This is the model he has, and later on I will show you the 3D of it. And this is another model he made, and they both had the same logic. I started off doing things like that, where I was exploring forms and exploring how can I use the outline to redefine what a stadium today means. Then on, I went on to make my own drawing machine, where I believed in plan that I need to look at the different angles that I need to block out for people to have a better visual angle. So I blocked out certain areas that are grayed out here, because in those areas you won't be able to see as much, because it's the best visual angle is 60 degrees. These are first iterations I had considered, where I basically created stadiums that are tailored for certain players. So here, for instance, my parameters were 2 players, one that is like attack and volley, and other one is a counter puncher. So how would that stadium look like if these 2 players would play against each other? And then I made a whole catalog of these different iterations. But in that sense, I was working more in plan. I then started looking at a section and how can a section look like and what are the parameters I need to have in the section in order for me to redefine the stadium. So in the first part of my section, I decided to make formal seatings where people have a clear vision, a good C value, and you have your formal seating. In the next part of it, I decided to make informal seating. So I'm mixing between informal and formal. I also created ca- uh, um, I I also created parts where you can have shades, and with all these different parameters, I started creating what I redefined as a stadium. Um, I named my stadiums. Every stadium has a player, and every form is according to a player. So basically, this one is Djokovic, where I highlighted his different strokes. So he's a very stable player, where he has all his strokes very distributed accordingly. So this stadium was more of a this is the form Djokovic would take, and according to that, I changed my parameters. So for instance, I didn't only look at the way he plays, I also looked at his energy. So for that, I also added informality and formality. So in this specific stadium, he's 45% informal and 35% formal. So that is one shape he can have. And that's another, a totally different shape, the same parameters, but changing the range of parameters in order to have all his different type of game that he can have. Then I did that for several other players like Nadal, Federer, Serena Williams, and Navratilova. So every single player has his own customized stadium that is based on their strokes, based on formality and informality of play, and visual angles, and the maximum distance, and all of these parameters together came to make more of a topography that I have not imagined to happen. From the stadium that we have today, I all of a sudden found my stadium merging into a topography because of the different slopes I'm using. For informality, the slopes will be from 6% to 10%. But if you're informal, which would be more of steppings, you'll have inclinations of 20% to 27%. So by just changing this small parameter, even the height of the stadium changes and the topography merges to be something totally different. This is how I'm imagining in the future to do it when the stadium starts being more of a topography and merging down, so that it starts creating different areas where people also can have different experiences, but being part of this huge topography. And the whole idea was to make an experience. So when you come and pay for your seat, you're paying for an experience, you're not paying for a seat. And also you could put this modular in any stadiums today, and you can guarantee that the stadium tickets would be the same because all the C values of the different seating areas is 12 centimeters or above. So that's how today they make the ticketing system, that if you can see above someone's head 12 centimeters or 15 centimeters, these are the highest rated tickets. And in this specific stadium, I have all these stadiums, I have looked at those parameters to optimize it. And this is the point of view of the tennis player, which I wanted him to be less intimidated. So like, because it's a topography, you will feel more of free, and you feel like there's a landscape, and you'll see more of the sky rather than a lot of people around you. And this is what the spectator will see in the stadium. And the whole idea is to more unlimited experiences. Yes, thank you. I would like to first show you, I'd like to first show you, I also did a small interface where I could basically, I've said, what if Rogers Stadium plays against Djokovic? What if Rogers Stadium plays against Djokovic? What iterations would I get? So basically, I have here Roger versus Djokovic, and these are the several iterations I can have from them playing against each other, or the different players, the different stadiums who play against each other. If I were to have Navratilova, I get other shapes. So depending on how, on the different like parts that are talking to the player, you can mix and match players to make different topographies and endless shapes. Yeah, and I would like to invite you to my mother. So, ba- so basically by okay, so basically by considering all the different parameters like proximity, visual angle, and informality and formality, I started creating different shapes that will have different sections depending on what we want to have for the player today. So like, for instance here, my different parameters were like 30% informal seating, 50% formal seating, and circulation. And then Navratilova, for instance, is a serve and volley type of player. So in that sense, the more focused part would be where she plays, where you can see the serve the best. And the other one here, like someone like Serena Williams, she has a very good serve and has a good forehand and backhand, and therefore you have different outlines. So basically, according to their strokes, the outlines change, but according to their style, the section changes. So the section and the outline work together to create different topographies that could be integrated in several sites and several areas. And here you can see how I was imagining to have two different stadiums together, merged together to become one topography, and people could walk and could sit here informally to also use the space to have multi-purposes for the space. And basically what I was trying to show with the interface, we can also do here, where we can just mix and match all the different players. We could, so, yeah. Yeah. Um, like the way I was thinking about it for now was like more to understand the section and how the section could be changed to maximize your different parameters. But I haven't yet really thought about it like moving or like. But the idea is wherever you put it in a site, the parameters would be according to that site, so it will merge. It will merge to the site to be part of it.
So, is the assumption that there is, way I'm thinking of thinking that three different phenotypes plants or this structure. And you wonder, suppose the question is there an ideal one in which all of these are distortions of that, or there is no ideal one, that they are kind of hybrid versions of themselves until they become so different that they belong to different.
No, like the whole idea that I want to show here is like there's no ideal one. There is an experience I want to tell you, and according to that experience, this stadium will change. So, yeah.
Is there an ideal tennis player? I mean,
No.
of the parameters that you mentioned above.
No, because we're human. So that's the whole thing about the stadium. That Djokovic almost, but we're human.
Statistically, if you were to take the most optimum set of, I mean, I know that, right? I mean,
No, but the point is that's the beauty of science, and that's the beauty of what I'm trying to say is that it's your experience. It's a human. I can't predict you today, but I can give you an experience to watch. And you tell yourself, okay, today I want to be informal. I want to watch this part of him, but I can't predict him. Today Djokovic was great. He lost to Monte Carlo, first round, 6-2, 6-1, played the worst match of his life. But you know what I mean? So like you can't really you can't idealize any player, but you can say today for your clients or whoever you want to do it today, I'm creating this because these are the parameters I want to enhance. Exactly.
There are a number of, there are a number of assumptions. So in the history of this biological and zoological science, the assumption of an ideal, which we knew didn't exist, the assumption of an ideal form was to actually help us categorize difference and to imagine unprecedented variation, right? So there was both. There was an ideal plant. These are variations to help us form species, but can we imagine in their difference the possibility of new ones, unprecedented ones? If you tell me that there isn't an ideal under quotes, right?
Yes,
that
yes.
there isn't an efficient form that you're fighting against, the difference across these signify a series of assumptions and are less interesting than saying, are there players that don't exist that push the form of the stadium to be unlike any of the players that exist today? So what you're telling us is that you are making a series of assumptions that take the performance of a player and translate it to form, and you're playing them out. And I wonder, is there the possibility, I'm just trying to be, is there the possibility to imagine an empirical player, right, that doesn't exist,
But
and the possibility of hybridizing, so that
yes, because the beauty of it is that it is looking it. Yeah.
they're totally opposite. Conceptually, they're on the order. Of course, Haeckel got into a lot of trouble by drawing the ideal plant. Everybody was totally terrified, and the ideal race. I think it had all kinds of other reasons, but it helped categorize difference. It's a different way of dealing with difference. If you make assumptions and you create difference based on those assumptions, there isn't anything that you're really struggling against, right? What are you struggling against? So, I don't know where your thoughts are with it.
I guess like the biggest struggle as it is was to break the boundary of that circle and to understand how different people interact. Yes, the struggle, like I was not making assumptions as much as I was creating space. I was creating an experience, and it is not an assumption. It's more of I'm making a decision to work through that decision and say, okay, today I want to give you an informal seating where you see 12 centimeters above the person in front of you, and you will be sitting very. I will enhance your view to Djokovic. This is what I would give you if this is the case. If I want the other player, that's the case. So I made no assumptions. I took parameters that I think are relevant for my relationship player spectator, and I made all the different iterations for that specific player. And the beauty of tennis is we're all part of each other. So at the end, if you see, they talk to each other because we all have a forehand and a backhand and a serve. And you can tailor the people to fit it because, I'm no Djokovic, but
main issue of the variation when you're creating this kind of family of variation is accumulation of data, no? Accumulation of data and values. And when it comes to data and values, you can never have a one optimized one. You can have one optimized one based on the parameters that you choose, but you cannot have an ideal one that is responding to all these sets of data and parameters. And I think that what for me,
you could have an average form of all of them together, right? And then you'd understand you can have an average one.
yes, but
but isn't it the circle traditional way of the stadium, the average one?
But then it loses its
because
maybe.
No, but maybe, you know, like, if I understand correctly, what you are searching is, yeah. But okay, what you're talking about is a kind of a one starting point that is fed by the parameters that you decide. Whereas it is the perspective of the service, or whereas it is the, you know, like.
I was showing here like the visual angle on the plan. How can I make that relationship between the spectator and the tennis player? And from that, I just made a shape that could be infinite, because you can be very close, you can be very far, and that's what I argue, that you will decide what you want. I'm not going to decide for you. I'm going to give you the options, and you're going to decide. So So yeah, like for instance, for a doubles match, no. So like the way I was designing it, that is, I was looking at a section, and that section could vary. If I'm playing two players, there are two players that playing. I will make a part of it that fits that player. So the client will tell me at that stage, I want these different things to happen in the stadium, and I will change my parameters accordingly.
Yeah, for a bit of it. I watched it from that. Okay.
My mind would be to manage to create different variations in a
Yes.
time, which means that I would expect kind of more soft materiality involved in the project
Yeah.
that would allow this kind of information.
Yes.
Otherwise, it becomes very,
Yeah.
like, speculative for design decision, but that design decision is not related to the players. The scenario is with everybody, right? So, if it was, for example, for the second event, I don't know, if it was like, this minimize the population, whatever, no? But the client might get more information.
Yeah.
But if it's based on the parameters that is so much related to the player, with a scenario that only occurs.
Yeah, like exactly.
So for me, I would have expected, and maybe the way
It was,
put it forward,
yeah.
of how we can rethink this kind of very rigid,
It's, yes, I didn't say it's rigid. I, like it's the idea. Yeah, it adapts. That's the whole. So like it will yes, it adapts. That's yes, it adapts. Yeah, like it's
that is a very strong, I mean, that's a very strong statement. We need to have some answers to it.
yeah, like should, yes, but the point, the yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, like it's adaptable. Like definitely, I was gonna look into materiality, but that I could take further.
But now it's yeah. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Press here, right?
Yeah, but because for some of them,
Why would it just?
yeah, maybe some of them are rolling.
No, like no, but
No.
it's
Wait.
different.
No.
Different.
No. But each player has their best shot. So you want
Pointer,
people
pointer, do you need
to
pointer?
get more places where the best shot is best seen. So you well, efficiency in terms of tennis game. Yeah, 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 yeah. And okay, since we said this, of course, no one. Oh, you wait. Yes, for Nadal, yes. But something important that if it doesn't move, that is something that Yasmin has gone through. If materiality or we cannot find a way that this thing adapts to each player,
Yeah.
the same model
Not-
can be applied
not standing up
in the
anymore.
existing stadiums, say Wimbledon Central Court, for the ticketing price. So now we know, according to all the parameters that Djokovic has or Nadal, which areas you're going to price more because she knows the areas that is going to be best seen, which is something interesting because now it is different how these stadiums are ticketed, exactly, because of proximity, not because of best shot. So her model is interesting that it can be applied to existing things, but ideally because she's concerned, because she's a player, on how players see the stadiums, not how spectators, how they're affected, and that's why she was talking about experiences, not only about people, but about players. Like, stop thinking of tennis players as monkeys performing. They are people, please.
No, I think that is very clear, all our colleagues. But for me, the mention to Darcy Thompson was very clear because at the beginning, always I had the impression that was very enormous exercise of data and topology, you know. And in fact, I think that as us, no, you have the portrait more or less perfect, but when you eat, you feel, no? And when you are sometimes that you are able to transform yourself. And no, it's true, and you transform yourself. And for me, the question was, but this is different fixed situations, and this, or they are movable. If they are movable, they are clear. And how to do, well, it's different. It's a space-time dynamic system. There is a project, for example, I remind you of Senetos, very simple with metallic elements, not to do a lot of performative things, but perhaps just to change in every moment, not in every moment, in different steps. And I think, well, at the beginning I had the idea, it was another idea. It was the idea of urban, that the data were more urban or landscape. I don't know, if you are in a stress situation, you can be, I don't know, between buildings or in a space. But it's true that at the end we have fixed answers. In your case, it's absolutely dynamic, depending on players or programs or other things. No? My question is, how type of player are you? I want to no, because for example, no, what's yours exactly? And I like sometimes to see tennis. My kind of players are how to play in dynamics. The guys that go to the not the kind of who's Borgo that are very flat. No, there are people because if you are this kind of people that always win, but in the back of the piste, no, very very sure. Federer is a little this for me. It's a little boring. You need to be. You say, well, I go, but yes, but if you are fixed, is a kind of Nastase, McEnroe, all the guys everywhere. You need to be clear, close of the piece. These kind of parameters for me are interesting, and I imagine that you are more emotional and passionate than not systemic. But perhaps I want to see your as you are playing and what kind of stadium is your stadium. We have an enormous player here. It's a champion in her country. No? No, exactly. Because if you are more aggressive, you need to the data are the intensity of that. If you are more systematic, perhaps you need another kind of parameter.
You have someone like Princess Navratilova where everything is much more planned in because she's a cerebral body. She like that's how she plays. So you need to be more close to that area.
Assuming that these are in fact ideal, maybe ideal is the wrong word, but overlapping their forms in different locations, so you have different complexes. What would you have to do to reconcile the chain that exists with one of these? How would you do? What would the individual reorientation be? And reorientation is less evolution. Evolution of the more one of the interventions that you would make to get us closer to this world rather than the world that we're still. I think just that again. Like that's my opinion. Overlap both forms in terms of work out there.
change the hot part. We cannot say anything about this anymore because it's wrong. So is there anything that you can apply?
Yeah, like the one thing that is that I try to look at however the diameters would be, you would change these parameters like the visual, the informality, formality, according also to the certain sport you're playing. Because at the end, this has become more of a public space that you want to highlight things in, or not highlight things, or have you sit something, or have you be like super formal. So it has become more of a dialogue between people than just.
It has to do with my second question.
Yes.
That I like this step here,
Yes.
where you are also dealing
Yeah.
with the theory that you
Exactly.
have. But this actually, when there is no tennis,
It,
would be
exactly. The whole idea here was that I took one of my thesis and I realized what if it goes down and becomes a landscape, so it becomes more of a public space where people can hang out, people can stay, and you highlight things. You can have their performances, you can have other things happen, not just that.
Very good.
Okay.
Yasmin, is this yours? Can I have a drink?
Yasmin, thank you very much. And we start with you, Philip. We are running faster. So, no, but we will need to wait food.
We have to wait.
No, we don't have to wait.
I'd like some more.
You have 1 second to breathe, and we start.
Can you hear me? You ready? First of all, good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to be here as well. My name is Philip Serif, and the first thing I'd like you to do is stand up and come and stand around this table. Please. Around this table. This is the final product that I arrived at after 9 months of work. What you're looking at is a refugee camp in Dadaab, Kenya. And the main idea for me, well, come around here as well if you can't see. So what am I trying to do, and what is this showing? First of all, this is a theoretical representation of the camp, and this is a more realistic representation. Is there enough light there? Can you see that? Okay. Yeah. So what was I trying to do? Basically, when a refugee becomes a refugee, he is very emotionally stressed. So that was the main point I wanted to go from. I wanted to go from emotional instability of the refugee to emotional stability of the refugee. And to do this, one would have to provide a comfortable environment. And how to do this, I'll get to that later. Ultimately, the final step that I wanted to take for the refugee was repatriation or reinitiation of the person into real life, rather than just being in limbo and not knowing what's going on, which is the case in all refugee camps, or most of them at least. And the geometric method I used to arrive at these forms was fractals, fractal geometry, fractal mathematics. And why use fractals, you may ask? Well, I was using the fractals mainly because of the interconnectedness, the system that it inherently has and is and always will be, and using this system to create a whole network, so to say, of interconnected communities and a larger community as a whole. So as you can see on the map here and here, there's various clusters, and these clusters also pertain to the fractal theory as well, of self-similarity and recursiveness, as well as scalelessness. So the fractal theory basically fits into the idea of a system and how a refugee camp works and all of its functionalities and assets very well. So the parameters that I used to generate this form were the site parameters as well as internal parameters themselves from fractal itself and the refugee camp and what's being formed. So some of the parameters that I used were water sources, for example, inclination, humidity, among others. I'll iterate that later on. So yeah, now you can sit down and I will explain how I arrived at this.
Fall asleep.
No, no worries. So the name of my project is displacement, but also on the poster it says homogeneous flux. So displacement is in terms of the refugee and the person being displaced, and homogeneous flux is the state of being of a thing that I guess moves or morphs backwards. So growth, retraction. Can you hear me now? It's good. Okay. So these are the things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to introduce the situation of the refugee camps, then my first iterations of forms, the development of the method that I'm using, applying the method in a realistic manner, so for this, then what the method yields, and some conclusions and potential next steps that I would like to take if I take this to another level. So this is a very important image to me. It's the refugee camp in Jordan, and it clearly shows that there is almost no organization. I mean, you can see a central road, but that's about it. And this is what really awoke my interest into looking into refugee camp organization and how I can not sustain, but aid these people in making a smoother transition from war zone, camp, and back to where they belong or somewhere else. There are already aid methods in place, such as Shigeru Ban, he works a lot with cardboard. Even IKEA is making housing that can be shipped. And then there's more stylistic designed aspects, for example, Abir Seikali, who was designing the water retention tents. I mean, there's all these methods, but the one problem with all these methods is that they are single standalone entities. There's no interaction among themselves. Not that I found, at least. So looking back at history, when you look at, especially mainly the Romans, they used the method of integration to grow their empire, which ultimately led to their downfall. If you look at World War II as well, Germany after the war the population was very low. So what they did was ask people to come to their country, integrate, and so on. And this is what helped them rebuild. This logic I'm trying to also kind of use with the camp and the various and varying nationalities, people, religions, and how they can really work together. Now this is the main sort of societal theory that I'm using. It's a theory by a person named Abraham Maslow. It's called the Pyramid of Human Happiness. It has 5 levels, and it is the most basic thing that you need to be happy, so to say. I mean, it sounds a bit cheesy, but that's what it is. So the first level is safety, psychological and physical safety. The second level, which is blue, is family, belonging, community, ties, the beginnings of these. Oh yeah, and the first level also are deal with activities for the community. The second level, activities with the community. The third level, green, is the self-esteem level. This is a very important level because it begins to allow the refugees who have now been built up with the most basic, it allows them to see what their potential is again. So it moves them beyond being a refugee. It starts moving them beyond being a refugee. And then the final, the other, is the self-actualization. This means that the refugee has moved beyond completely and is able to contribute effectively to his immediate environment or move out and contribute to other environments effectively, as he would have done before stress factors or war or famine or whatever caused that person to be there. So now the first iterations. The first technique I used was, for the iterations, was literally mass production. I had to understand how the fractal behaves internally, as well as how external factors can affect the fractal internally. So I was working with angles, and changing the angles in the fractal, changing the angles in the fractal caused it to expand or contract, and that's what I was learning. So again, why the fractal, self-similarity, recursiveness, scalelessness, and interconnectedness. These are the four main attributes that I was looking at. And I'd like to read you some quotes now from a few people, reinforcing the fractal theory coupled with a systems theory. So this is from Mandelbrot. Broadly speaking, mathematical and natural fractals are shapes whose roughness and fragmentation either tend to vanish or fluctuate up and down, but remain essentially unchanged as one zooms in and examination is refined. Hence, the structure of every piece holds the key to the whole structure. This reinforces the idea that clustering is a good way forward to really locate functionality, spatiality, and communal interaction. The next quote, Euclidean geometry is based on the one-dimensional line, two-dimensional plane, and three-dimensional volume. On the other hand, in fractal geometry, the dimension is relative. It is more concerned with the form generation and iteration. So this supports the notion that the iteration approach that I took before, mass production, is a valid one, as well as a valid idea for form generation, as you see here. And the final quote, which is probably the most important, maximum social and cultural diversity is possible and desirable within a cohesive unity. In fractal geometry, infinite diversity and unified order is an everyday occurrence, not an idealistic dream. The design must enhance, not diminish diversity, which is absolutely very fitting from my point of view for a refugee camp. So then I was looking into some potential precedents, and specifically at Ron Eglash's book, African Fractals, and how their communities are shaped by fractals which they employ. For example, this is, I think, a tribe in Cameroon, where the first block there, that's the seed, so to say, of the fractal. Then it multiplies and it becomes sort of in a large cluster, like I'm trying to emulate. And then the next step is, again, the iteration, and it becomes scaleless. It is basically a fractal, and yeah, this is what I was trying to emulate. So these are the first forms I generated. You can see them there as well. This was purely an internal experiment, so to say, to understand the fractal. This is the results from the catalogs. And what you can see here is in the top left is where the angles are very wide of the branching. So these angles, maximum 90 degrees, they create a grid-like pattern, so it's very controllable. However, it's very tight-knit, very many overlaps, and the functionality almost becomes it's just not there anymore. And then at the bottom right here is the other extreme, where the angle is the smallest, and the spread and the yield is the widest, but the control becomes almost impossible. So at this stage, I was deciding what angles I was trying to use, and I wasn't thinking further. Yeah, so these are some other iterations. And here you can really see that a network can start to emerge from these fractals, especially in the smaller angles. So now this method I had to develop, and I'll take you through that now. So the problems and the mistakes, like I said, uncontrollable. Well, controllable, but after a certain angle and certain amounts of iterations, it becomes uncontrollable. So I had to alleviate that. So then I decided to test out three approaches. One approach was maintaining this internal fractal from before. So this was made with one fractal alone. So I wanted to further test this idea out, yielding some promising results, I'd say. Showing in green the movement routes, the blue the potential, I guess, housing areas, and the red where medical centers and so on would be located. And this was the accompanying fractal that was generated to make that form. Then a palette approach, where each functionality that I explained from the Maslow's 5 hierarchies, each functionality was assigned a different fractal and then overlapped. So I generated these forms, and what I found was that it was very controllable, but the amount of iterations that I'd have to make a usable form were immense. So that was already, I can put that in the dustbin. And that was the accompanying fractal. And then this was actually this is the main idea that I stuck with in the end, the attractor approach. So basically, I would apply different attractor points where these fractal branches would sort of grow towards, because that's what they want. And this was also a way of splitting the clusters and being able to maintain an interconnectedness as well. So here you can see already clearly on the left side, there's more blue, on the right side, there's more green. So there's the splitting of functions, but also overlapping is still there. And that was the accompaniment. It's a bit underwhelming, but yeah. So then after that was the end of the second semester. And one of the main things was I didn't have a site. I didn't have a place where this can be located and tested. So I had to decide where the site was. And coincidentally, actually, this happened, I think 2 or 3 months ago, 2 months? I don't even know. But the place in Dadaab, Kenya, Garissa County, it was actually closed down. And the camps are sending all the people, I don't know where they're sending the people, but they've shut them down. And it housed around 500,000 people. And this, I mean, it's very unfortunate, but it was fortunate for me to be able to use such a realistic precedent. So I decided to locate it there in Dadaab in Kenya. And these were the existing camps there. There were 5 in total. One of the 5 was just being started. And they have very obvious problems: disease, overpopulation, violence, drug dealings, etc., etc. And these were the sort of things that I wanted to tackle. Mainly, the main 4 things now, putting all these things into 4, were sanitation, security, shelter, and most importantly, actualization or emotional rehabilitation of the refugee. So then I started applying the method to the location. First thing I did for the location was a landscape study. Like I said before, studying the water sources, inclination, humidity, radiation, and so on. Arriving at certain areas. For example, the blue area is where there is least amount of radiation, the least inclination, and the most positive or potential area for kind of living, I suppose. And the red area is exactly the opposite. So then I started applying these parameters to the model and experimenting with forms. And you can see from the first try, it was a bit of a failure. And mind you, here I was using straight-lined fractal forms. And I will be, to create these, I had to take a step to the next step. So these are some iterations. Each one is a different whole. So here, this is where I started using curves instead of straight lines. And already straight away in the first model that I did, the spread was very pleasing to the eye, and there was a lot of potential that I could see. Here as well, not really. And this is where it started becoming more spread out. The functionality started grouping into clusters. For example, here, up here, the housing. Here, they started kind of moving towards where the preferred area for themselves was. And then this was the pre-final camp that I arrived at. And you can see it's a circular fashion. It maintains connections, or relatively well maintains connections to the water sources, and has specific clusters for housing while maintaining connections between these clusters. This was the accompanying line diagram showing the different directions that these elements were going in, clearly showing that due to the closest water sources here, 1, 2, 3, 4, the whole thing, it was more spread on this side rather than this side, where it didn't really know where to go. This is a view of that, just to emphasize how overwhelming it is. And this was yes, this is a very important point. I started applying thicknesses to the fractal itself, to the lines which already had functions, in order to make these forms, because the lines wouldn't make kind of these clusters. And I have to also explain to you the method which I use, which I'll explain when you look at the drawings again. And this was the cluster itself. With this cluster, I found that this fractal, I found that because it was only one fractal trying to grow and trying to accommodate all of these functions, it was almost fighting itself. after several iterations, it became not like ununderstandable. It was almost like after a certain point, the growth didn't become a potential; it became a barrier. It was almost cancer-like, which was an epiphany for me. Yeah, and I'd like to read you this. I didn't have time to memorize it, but this is a realization that I had. The strength of the fractals is also its weakness. Interconnectedness or continuity is beneficial for this designated use, such as a system or a refugee camp. And the further it multiplies, the greater and increasingly interconnected the network becomes. However, this comes with the price that the following iterations and repetitions become less and less controllable, exponentially so. This is a great parallel to the notion that the further through the pyramid of Maslow one goes or an individual travels, the less imposed control he or she will come in contact with, as to encourage self-actualization, much like with the fractal becoming less and less tied down to the defining parameters. Basically, the system complements itself from a theoretical as well as a geometrical standpoint. So then I looked at that again, and then I arrived at the final thing. But to create this, I didn't use one fractal and one point. Mind you, the point that I used for the insertion was around here in the center of the water sources. So then, like I explained, it was almost uncontrollable. So then I decided to split up the insertion points of the fractals and lessen the degree of iterations. So then basically what I did was using each water source, I think there's 5 or 6, I located one fractal in each, and this allowed the fractals to grow into each other even more evenly than if it was just one growing exponentially. And this is what you saw before. As well, with the line diagram, you can see it's more comprehensible in a way. And this was the final plan, or I guess approaching a plan that I created. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. Who wants to start?
Can you just walk us through that plan? I mean,
Yeah,
can you
stand up again? Actually, I'll explain it right now.
from on the screen, if you have a pointer, you could just be telling us what the red or it's. I mean,
no, this one's okay.
If you just point or even just describe from afar.
Okay. Like so.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
So if you see here the red forms here spreading out like this, the red is where the refugee is inserted. This is where medical centers are, where municipal buildings that are necessary for the community are. So this is the first point of insertion. This is where the refugee comes into contact with the camp. And mind you, it is close to the road here, as well as the Dab itself here. And they have an airport as well for supplies. Then the next step here, these areas less red, but you can't really see them on the screen. You can see them well here. They accompany the dark red, the first step. This is the next step of the refugee, where he starts when he's not in such need, where he's not injured, where he's not psychologically damaged, where he's starting to become better in a sense as a state of being. He starts moving further out into the camp and come into contact with more people, more functionalities, and more potential for himself. Then the next step, the blue, which is the main. This is where the people live and form communities, spreads as far as possible. So these places, this is where I had trouble in the first iteration, where everything was so close together that functionalities overlapped each other and they didn't make sense anymore. So here I started to spread them out according to each fractal insertion point on the water sources. So here you can see sort of a side community forming here as well. And see here, because this is closer to the main city of the Dab as well as the airport, this is where perhaps more people who need more aid could go. Also here, next to the road, people who require or who want to sell goods, who want to trade more, this is where they might go. Then the next step was the green. This was the more it was designated short stay area. So where people can, this is where people start realizing their potential and how they can help the community. So they had to get around and talk to people, and this is where the short stay, the travel happens, even the more trade, and it basically forms the connections between these larger entities here. So you can see here it kind of curves into the red and continues onto this area here. And then you can't really see it though here. There's a purple. Yeah, the purple is found in the centers of each of these areas, and the purple is the self-actualization part. This is where the person, the individual, with all of these steps that he's taken through the hierarchy, is able to actualize himself, to contribute effectively to the community, with the community, interact with the community, make decisions for the camp itself, and not be pushed to the side by other governing bodies. Because this is what's happening right now. Refugees in the camps, they don't really have a say of what they're subject to preferential treatment depending on connections they have, and so on. So that's another thing that I was trying to tackle with this. And yeah, that's about it.
Where this system born?
Where it's born, where it starts from. Yeah. So the first point where each of these fractals that you can see on the drawings here, there's one here. It's the water sources, basically, which is the basic human necessity. So there's one here, here. I think there's one in here as well, and one up here. And each of these parameters, so to say, influence each other to form this.
Que uses unos puntos físicos del lugar para situarte.
Yeah. It was necessary to make it more believable, I suppose, and also the water sources. Another thing the water sources do. I created you can't see it here, but if you look at this map here, they're interconnected with each other. So this is the main road system, as well as landmarking systems, so the refugees can find their way around.
Muchas culturas antiguas que usaban sistemas fractales se ubicaban así. Por eso yo me buscas en Siria, que están unas ruedas. En México también hay implantaciones de este tipo, y yo al principio me preguntaba de dónde nacía todo el sistema.
Yes. So was that a question or? Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I didn't really know what is the purpose of your work. You took the refugee camp as a kind of playground, if I could say that, but it could be anything else. What is the question you are answering?
The question
for me, it's not really clear.
The problem that I'm trying to tackle is that when refugees arrive at camps, when they arrive from war, when they arrive from disaster, when they arrive from whatever they arrive from in a refugee camp, they are emotionally destroyed, pretty much. They're in limbo. They have their emotional state is down here. So they've lost their community. They've lost probably their family.
Yeah.
They've lost their self-respect. So that's the problem I'm trying to tackle through integrating the refugees with themselves, first of all, giving reason for them to be there through the Maslow hierarchy, as well as providing them with a sense of responsibility towards the camp, towards the place they are in.
In a difference to, unfortunately, to most of the refugee camps that they are set up now, is that you go in, but you don't know your way out. In this refugee camp is precisely prepared for this way out, and according to your necessities and this pyramid of needs that they start growing. And but it is important to the permanence of to question the permanence of the refugee camps. And one of the other things that Philip didn't talk was that sometimes refugee camps, they do end up being chronical, and they become cities themselves. So if that happens, one needs to think about social space in a different way than just military camp set up with orthogonal grids. So that's the driving, the question of the original project. Whether he succeeded or not, I think that's the question.
Yeah, so basically it's trying to hold the hand of a person who's regressed to being a child, essentially, who has nothing he or she can do, until they can stand again.
And from where comes all this data?
Data?
Yes.
Many places. And data in terms of what? Like, for example?
Because it's sometimes difficult on this subject to have data on this camp particularly. How was the process? It was difficult or not? How do you select it? And
I mean, it was very easy to find generic information, obviously.
yes, generic.
But I talked to the UN, to the UNHCR specifically, and they had a lot of numbers on size of plots, distances traveled, how the refugee camp, how you deal with religion, how you deal with sanitation. And they sent me all these papers and I had to go through. So from the UN, I got it. Yeah.
So how does your, I mean, I'm very interested in finding out more about your organization and fractals as a model to reorganize these places. But how would your project change if we knew it was permanent? If we actually knew, if we inserted into your system a kind of a permanence, so that certain line, maybe it's another color, maybe how would it change? Or is it already there and we just can't see it? I mean,
that's one of the things I had trouble with, because the fractal is recursive. It multiplies and you can decrease it as well. I didn't know how to show that in a drawing manner, but with this model, you can retract it in specific areas. You don't have to have this necessary outlook, this temporality. There's no physical definite state of being of the camp, so it can morph. Yes.
So if we put your parameters on the x-axis and then a time on the y, this gives us a certain intensity with population. I can imagine, right? So all the parameters on the bottom of occupation, population, resources, blank screen, and then on the y-axis, time. Does your system change if you know that you're in a particular? I mean, does it change in intensity only, or does it begin to really change? Like, if we came 50 years from now and found that to be the root, the kind of archaeology of a city. I mean, is that, or will this disappear? If I go up on the y-axis, does it disappear?
It depends on the person himself. It depends on the person.
No, but in the organization, in the camp itself, does the camp disappear?
No, essentially no, but it can. There's no yes or no really for this question, because the camp, it rehabilitates for the person, so the person afterwards can decide if he wants to stay here in the camp, go somewhere else, or return to the country he or she came from. So I can't decide that for him. It depends on the situation where the person is. So I can't really say if it's going to be there or not. I can say, however, that it can shrink and grow depending on how many people there are. It can shrink and it can grow. Yeah.
What is becoming interesting is that in a way you are somehow master planning a new city, but based on rules of ephemerality. And this is kind of interesting because it radically changes the way that we design cities, quote to quote, no? Where we are starting with heavy infrastructure, like planning that we know that they would stay there forever. And to me, it is becoming interesting to see how can we design such like let's say big scale urbanization or small scale urbanization that can expand or shrink with those ephemeral principles. And I have to say though, to be honest, that somehow in your presentation I'm getting lost and I'm not really sure whereas those are the principles that they are driving your design, or at some moment you are so attracted and amazed of all these kind of diagrammatic connections that you are almost losing the essence of the project. But that is the essence of the project. And I think that how, if you overlap this kind of ephemeral thinking, infrastructure, process of self-organization with the data that are come directly from the way that inhabitants occupy the space, then this would, let's say, boom into a kind of a new protocol of master planning. And I would love to see that in a more clear way, because it's somehow lost, and I'm struggling, and I'm speculating a lot, even on what I'm saying now. And I think that there is a lot of potential to push it towards there.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually one of the points that I was also disappointed with myself. I actually focused more on the ephemeral, like you said yourself. I wasn't focusing on the infrastructure, the sanitation, all the things that you can touch and feel. I was trying to tackle the sociological aspect of it, and maybe that was the downfall in the end. But it's something that I definitely would like to expand on.
Question 10-year or 15-year or informal versus formal, right? You know, some of the challenges of the informal city is that it depends on the formal, right? I mean, actually, you only get through the informal if you have, and that there is an actual balance. If the formal takes over, it doesn't work. And if the informal is there by itself, and so there's orders of magnitude, right, to informal settlement before it just collapses. And there's always, by planning, hard formal highways and services and things that are brought into. So, I mean, it would be extraordinary if you could bring in time and then do magnitudes of time, and that really track out that relationship pragmatically. I mean, water has a formal, you know, footprint, and then it distributes itself. And then what happens if there's a balance in which it goes towards one or the other across time?
Philip, just a reaction to congratulate you. I am very happy to see the final result, because when we talked some months ago, we were talking about a lot of things, fractals, mathematicians, Michael Beatty, and Nikos Anlingaros. We were talking a lot of references, and for you always they were very serious. See, I don't remember the name of, but always for Philip they were absolutely serious to take it not just as a reference that you manage, but to be there. Always when I am a little obsessed with these things and these kind of expressions. It's not always easy to work with this because there's something they are very abstract and sometimes closer to the mathematicians or the informaticians or the architects. But in your case, I think that you are doing a good research that is for us very important in the YAC because I think it's a big level of in terms of explaining how to manage the dynamic systems, the bottom-up situations, the spontaneous, etc. I am very interested, to be sincere. We were talking the beach processes, in the settlements, the spontaneous settlements, etc. But the thing that I like a lot is the interest that you try to systematize this in a kind of clusterizations or assemblage of groups. And it's not easy, but it's not easy. It's not easy. But for how to manage the individuality and not the collectivity, but the groups in with different parameters of density, movements, paths, etc. For us, it's very important for the city, for the new urbanism, for the advanced urbanism, and in this sense, just to congratulate it. Sure that you have a lot of things to be critical. Perhaps the architectural answer, to be sincere, or the landscape answer. Perhaps it's not a project to this kind of approach. It's a project of the processes, of the representation of the processes, etc., etc. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to all the jurors. You've been very kind. Jordi and I would like to thank as well all the students. We're very satisfied with the work, but most of all, that what we like is precisely that you have not finished it, the work itself. I think it's an open project that I hope in your future and your career you can develop. It is important that for us, at least with Jordi, we have the feeling that we've managed to show you that the imminence without being actualized, like letting it without formalizing things to the end, is as well a good thing to learn. Well, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
No, one word from me. Yes, guys, congratulations. Congratulations to the faculty as well. It was a pleasure to see the presentations. We meet back at 3 p.m. with the presentations of Vicente Goyar, Studio Vicente Goyar. Please be back. Okay? And we would like to invite Judy for a little lunch up, but we need just a little cigarette or coffee break before, because they are just placing it on the table. Just little breeze outside, and we go up.
No, in cities. Uh-huh.
They have a huge part of it, and they study the agglomeration in India. There's one very famous where the population of 2 million in one complex.
Wow.
Like less than a month. So it's a book. I was looking at it online, but it's called Instant Cities Project, JFD, and then you'll see they have the